Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for another Napa Valley Sessions. We're really excited about tonight's session. We had, as of this morning, attendees from 21 countries around the world coming to learn about how to sell Napa Valley wines. The goal of today's session is to provide an overview of Napa Valley's top varieties, particularly for members of the wine trade, to help them sell our wines, sell other wines to other members of the trade and to consumers around the world. We particularly want to hone in on ways that we can help you discuss these wines, so the little ways that we can help you talk about them, describe them, and compare them to other similar wines around the world. To help us do that, we've asked three prominent winemakers to share their opinions on what makes Napa Valley wines distinct. This is the second in a three-part series that we're doing for members of the trade. You can also catch our Napa Valley Rocks seminar, which was aired on March 2nd on our website, and then join us in 2 days' time for a discussion of Napa Valley's subregions. And all three of these sessions together are to support a program that we're participating in called Hopwine. Hopwine is a virtual international trade fair. So if you are an importer or if you're looking to expand your Napa Valley portfolio, please visit hopwine.com to discover 23 Napa Valley wineries, including all three that we have on the panel today. Please join them, go to hopwine.com to browse the selections, engage with those vintners, and actually request samples of real wine to be mailed to you so that you can taste the wines and see if they work for your portfolio. We are super excited about today's session, and I'm super excited about our moderator for today's session. Natalie Wang is a Hong Kong-based wine journalist who has worked and reported on Asia, and specifically the Chinese wine market, for more than 5 years. She's recently founded vinojoy.com, the only English website dedicated to covering the expanding and complex wine industry in China and Asia. Her reporting on the drinks industry led her to win the Young Communicator of the Year by Cathay Pacific International Wine and Spirits Awards in 2017. Aside from wine journalism, she consults wineries on Chinese social media, marketing, and other business in Asia. And prior to founding Vinojoy, she was the managing editor of Drinks Business Hong Kong and also jamessuckling.com. And I had the privilege of meeting Natalie a couple years ago, back before all this COVID stuff, back when we were able to host trade in Napa. She visited Napa with us back in October 2019, and it was a pleasure to show her the region and all of the fantastic wines that we produce. So Natalie, I invite you to come on and take it away from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Connor, for your kind words. I really enjoyed our visit to Napa 2 years ago before the pandemic, and I look forward to visiting Napa again.
Yep, can't wait to have you. It seems so long ago, right?
Yeah, indeed. At least now we have something to look forward to. Thanks, first of all, for having me to moderate the session. I'll give everyone a brief introduction of Napa Valley before we go into panel discussion. Located just an hour north of San Francisco, Napa, without a doubt, is the wine capital for America and perhaps the most renowned New World wine region, most importantly for its high standard quality wines, its polished style, and in part the now famous 1976 Judgment of Paris, organized by the recently deceased Steven Spurrier, that saw Napa wines triumph in big names in Bordeaux and Burgundy. But despite its reputation, the land under vine in Napa Valley is actually quite small. About 10% of Napa County is planted with grapes, and Napa only produces roughly 4% of California wines. Surprisingly, given its commercial success, the region is only home to 475 wineries, and 95% of them are still family-owned. Napa only started winemaking roughly 200 years ago, but it is the first AVA in the US, a title given to it in 1981 for its distinction in winemaking and history, unique climate, and terroir. Influenced by its proximity to the Pacific Ocean, Napa enjoys a dry Mediterranean climate. The dry summer allows grapes to ripen evenly, slowly, and ensures consistency of style year in and year out. And in Napa, there are 16 different AVAs. Each one has its unique climatical conditions. The San Pablo Bay to the south helps bring in cool winds and moderate the temperature. The two mountains, the Vaca Mountain to the east of Napa helps protect the vineyards from the intense heat from the Central Valley in the east, and the Maya climates help block cooler marine influence from the Pacific Ocean in the west. And in terms of grape varietals, of course, Cabernet is the king here. No other grapes have enjoyed such success as Cab in Napa Valley. But in fact, there are more than 40 different wine grape varietals planted in Napa County. 21% of vineyard acreage is dedicated to white wines and 79% to red wines. 6 of the top planted grapes in Napa are Cabernet, Chardonnay, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, and Zinfandel. Today, we're very lucky to have 3 panelists who are well-versed in those grapes and have a wealth of experiences and expertise in making those delicious wines from Napa Valley. They are Sarah from Pedju Winery, who has been with the winery since 2006. Before joining Pedju, she honed her skills at Kendall Jackson and was voted Napa's best winemaker 2 years in a row by Napa Valley Life magazine. So thrilled to have Sarah here. And then we have Richie from Rambauer Vineyards. Born in Adelaide in Australia, Richie has experiences of making wines in Australia, New Zealand, before returning to California in 2004. He worked his way up as an assistant winemaker at Rambauer to today's director of viticulture and winemaking. So very lucky to have Richie with us as well. And last but not least, we have Matt from Brand Napa Valley. Matt studied wine and viticulture at university and traveled far and wide to learn about wine in different regions. And his curiosity of wine has led him to Argentina, South Africa, Eden Valley, ultimately Napa Valley. And Matt worked at a little unknown winery called Dana Estate for years before joining Brand Napa Valley to oversee the winemaking at the winery. So without further ado, let's welcome all the winemakers on the panel, and we'll start with Sauvignon Blanc. Hi, hello everyone.
Hi everyone.
Hi, great. Fantastic. So today we'll start with Sauvignon Blanc. It is actually the second most widely planted white varietal in Napa, just after Chardonnay. And all of you guys have experiences in your past work experiences and current job positions with Sauvignon Blanc. So I'll start with the question, what would be a typical Sauvignon Blanc in Napa Valley? Oh, your mic is muted.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, okay, great.
I guess someone needs to start. So welcome, everyone. I would say, so here's the thing about Napa. There's so much diversity and so many, there's not necessarily maybe one specific style, not only for just Sauvignon Blanc, but probably for any of the varietals. Maybe we're consistent. It's a wonderful growing region. We're very fortunate to be able to make wine here. But so I think because there's so much diversity, you can find everything from more of the green, herbaceous, more New Zealand style, if you will, all the way up to wines that are fresh and great acidity with more tropical notes, to even Sauvignon Blancs that have some oak influence, right? So we all have different ways of making it, depending on where your Sauvignon Blanc grows. So there's a lot of different types of Sauvignon Blanc, but I think you're going to find in general, and I'm going to call it, more than what the Napa Valley or maybe the California style tends to be, and this is a generalization, but bright, crisp, good acidity with, like for us, more of the tropical notes, more, you're going to find some good citrus notes in there, but with also some tropical pineapple, guayaba, to maybe even some peach or apricot notes to it.
I see. It's quite interesting. So in terms of winemaking, how would you handle Sauvignon Blanc?
So,
Yeah.
I'll take it for a minute. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, kind of as Sarah said, with just the diversity of the topography and climate within the Napa Valley, there's the same diversity in winemaking techniques. So,
Yeah.
My experiences range from anything between going for, picking early, making that fresh style, fermenting in stainless steel tank, leaving it in that stainless steel tank, bottling it early, and, kind of positioning a wine for early consumption, all the way to maybe more of like a Grave style, where we're whole cluster basket pressing, for example, directly into barrels, doing fermentation in new or neutral barrels, amphora, clay terracotta amphora, or concrete, and keeping those wines on lees for extended aging. I've aged Sauv Blanc up to about 18 months and gone for more of an age-worthy Grave style. So again, just a really wide range of techniques and tools at our fingertips here that we can use.
Oh, that's quite exciting because, California and Napa, people are known for the Fumé Blanc that's pioneered by Robert Mondavi. And of course, you have the crispier style, like Sarah said as well. Maybe I'll ask Richie as well, because Richie, you're from Australia. You had experiences making Sauvignon Blanc in Australia and New Zealand. And when you return to California, how do you compare those two styles?
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand, if you look at probably the most famous style out of New Zealand, it's going to be Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And Marlborough is significantly cooler than Napa. Napa as a whole, for growing Sauvignon Blanc, it's a little bit warmer. The soils are very different. If you look at, say, the valley on the south side of Marlborough, that's going to have really rocky soils, similar to something you see in Côte Rôtie. And the wines have a very high acid. They're definitely, the flavors are cut grass, asparagus, bell pepper or capsicum, depending on your flavor or name. And probably on the riper side, you're going to get gooseberry and blackcurrant bud. Whereas in Napa, I find we generally start at that gooseberry and blackcurrant bud, and we go through to those riper flavors like Sarah spoke about. And so we see white stone fruit, maybe guava, and some of the riper expressions.
Tropical notes, right? Oh, I see. Yeah. And Sarah, at Pedju, you have 6 different vineyard estates, and Sauvignon Blanc is planted in the northern part of Napa in Pope Valley. So how does the vineyard site selection define the style that you're making?
So for us, we have, I have Sauvignon Blanc planted in 2 of our vineyard properties, and it is more on the northeastern portion of the Napa Valley, which tends to be very warm and also but very cool at night. So much cooler than maybe the valley floor, but definitely gets warmer, which actually I think that's a phenomenal place to grow Sauvignon Blanc. It's one of the better places, I think. I've played with Sauvignon Blanc in many other areas of Napa, but that area tends to be better. I like to play with it. One of the things that we get to do, and because of the our ability, is I do something like Matt does. I pick a little bit early for some of that natural acidity. I want to make sure that I get some specific flavor profiles from that part, but I also then allow some to hang a little bit longer. And then I also have 6 different clones. So we have, not only is there a diversity of where we're growing it and the 2 different vineyard properties, but in that we also have some vineyard and hilly aspects, and with the different clonal selection, and one of them being the Muscat clone, which also you can pick a little bit earlier and have less of those maybe herbaceous characters that some people really like, but I try to lean away from.
Oh, I see. Wow, that's exciting. So you really do have like a diversity of styles there, just even the winery itself. That's
Correct.
quite exciting. Yeah. And now, with that in mind, now let's move on to the most widely planted white varietal in Napa, which is, of course, as you might already know, it's Chardonnay. And for a lot of consumers, even in Asia, when you talk to them about Napa Chardonnay, people tend to describe American Chardonnay as oaky and ripe, or people, drink a lot of the Chablis and they will say, oh, it's a little bit fat, a little bit oily and flaccid. Would for people who say things about that about Napa Chardonnay, what's your response? Is that a generalization of Napa Chardonnay?
I'll jump in as soon as I
Yeah.
make so much Chardonnay. I would say, yeah, I mean, the quintessential California style is going to be richer than the Chablis. It's going to be higher in alcohol. It's going to have riper flavors. And with that, that ripe flavor, oak tends to go. And so, where, probably in the 90s, there was definitely very, very oaky styles. As the Napa Valley has evolved over time, over the last few decades, it's all about balance of fruit and oak and how you integrate that into the wine. So while it's a generalization about California as a whole, I would say that if you looked at modern winemaking, especially in the Napa Valley, it's more about balancing that fruit intensity with that oak in balance. And I'd say, where certain parts of the world, the wines have become more oaky, I'd say Napa Valley has probably become less oaky and more into balance.
Right. That's good. So it's nice to see there's an evolution of style in Napa. Like you said, 90s, maybe the oaky and riper style is preferred. Then how would you describe the current popular Chardonnay style in Napa?
Well, Sarah, you want to help me out? It's
Well, delicious.
so,
Of course. And like you mentioned the evolution, right? And then in today's market, would you say there's a preferred style of Chardonnay? Or in your words, because you guys are all winemakers, is there a style that you aspire to in Chardonnay?
sure, I'd say there's been a real shift towards balance of fruit and oak and acid. And if you can get them all in balance, the wines are getting better and better. The understanding of how to use oak more judiciously, better oak sourcing, better vineyard practices. There's been a real shift from growing Chardonnay all over the Napa Valley to down to the southern end of the valley, where we can get a more varietal intensity and better acid balance. So it's definitely evolved over the last few decades. And I'd say right now, some of the greatest Chardonnays in the world, you could put, Napa Valley Chardonnay, especially from the southern end of the valley, up against those wines, and I think you'd be hard pressed to really pick the best from some of the riper styles from other parts of the world. And it's been I've worked all over the place and made Chardonnay in many, many countries, and to see how Napa Valley especially has evolved its style has been really, really fun to be part of.
Yeah. In terms of planting Chardonnay in Napa, do you see with the climate change, do you see some changes in terms of picking as well? Do you notice, you have to pick fruit a little bit earlier to retain the freshness in the fruit?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely picking. I don't know if early is really the right characteristic. Definitely picking more on acid balance rather than pure sugar, like you probably would have seen 2 decades ago, to try and find that perfect sweet spot between like acid and fruit. And there's a big generational transition in Napa Valley. Matt's really young, Sarah's really young, I'm really young, and we're sort of like this new breed of Napa Valley winemaker that have come through.
Yeah, too, very young.
We've got a different perspective, and so it's all about making wines that not only appeal like to our US customers but our global customers. And we export to the world, and making a style that appeals to customers globally, but still shows California at its best is the key. And we can't make a white Burgundy in Napa Valley, but they can't make a Napa Valley Chardonnay in Burgundy. And so we have to, and I think that's really the key of what we're doing now as a community of winemakers, is making a style that is California at its core, but has global appeal, and it's based on that right fruit intensity that we can get, and balancing that with oak and acid and all the other components are able to work with. And that, I'd say, it's across the board with all the wines that you see coming out of Napa Valley these days.
That's really exciting development. And as Richie alluded to in his, talk, that, in the southern part of Napa, you see more exciting, Chardonnay coming up. And in 2016, I noticed that Peugeot Winery, you purchased a vineyard in Canaros. Maybe Sarah, you can tell us a little bit more what motivated that move, and how has that, vineyard side affected the Chardonnay that you're making?
Okay, sure. So what motivated the move? Well, we were family owned. And so the Peugeot family decided to purchase another piece of property. We purchased the old Acacia facility and the vineyard surrounding it. So really, I have Chardonnay growing at the very most furthest tip of the northern part of the Napa Valley, where it's much warmer, all the way down to the coolest part in the Carneros region. And there are distinct flavor characteristics that you're going to be getting from either place. One of the things that I would just throw in there really quickly is that Chardonnay, probably out of all the different varietals, in my opinion, at least, and you guys can chime in, is that you really have, it's more of a blank canvas. And so we really can go in and kind of shift and change the flavor profiles based on picking decisions, how much fruit we're leaving on the vine. A lot of this stuff can, we can do a lot in the vineyard to help kind of shift and guide the direction that we want to move the Chardonnay into. And then we can also have stuff that we can do in the vineyard, in the cellar. So there's a lot of things that we can do to Chardonnay that really, it doesn't have like a distinct flavor profile like a Sauvignon Blanc does, where it's real specific. Chardonnay is kind of like, I think it's a blank canvas. And so it's a winemaker's wine, if you will, also sense of place. So we are very fortunate here that we have really wonderful weather, and that we have a pretty diverse ability to kind of move it into all these different directions. For Carneros, I love that it's cool. It's right, our vineyard is right on the near the bay, so the San Pablo Bay. On clear days we can see San Francisco. On clear days, it's like, and it's beautiful and it's cool, and we have a great fog influence, and it's much cooler, which is really ideal for Chardonnay. So, in a nutshell.
Really great. As you said, Chardonnay, I absolutely agree with you. It's a blank canvas, and winemakers would have more of an imprint on the style of the wine. And then we'll talk about another fussy grape, Pinot Noir. Is notoriously fickle and fussy, and as the movie Sideways says, you really have to coax the grape into like a refined and elegant wine. So in terms of winemaking, how do you guys coax Pinot Noir into making like a great wine?
Sarah, you're the only one that makes Pinot on a regular basis, so I think you should answer that.
All right, I'll stop talking at some point. So Pinot, so it's interesting. How do we coax it? And so I'm going to give you from my perspective. I have 9 different clones down in our Carneros property, and it really, to me, has more to do with the different clones than trying to push the Pinot one direction or another. And yes, we can certainly do that to a certain degree, but there's going to be some clones that are going to give you more elegant, refined, delicate, complex, softer, more feminine notes, if you will. And then there's definitely, I have clones that are just bigger and more concentrated, and just like naturally just want to be bigger and have more robust in the Pinot. Then we can certainly, if you can do clonal selections and do it by themselves, you're going to have a certain like characteristic of that clone, also depending on where you're growing it. But then you can also, it's fun. Blending is so delightful and a great thing to do. There, you're picking decisions, of course, play into that. But when you can combine the different clones that you have access to, then you can have just an additional layers of flavors. And then on top of that, of course, the choices of, how you're doing your pinch downs and what you're doing in the cellar on top of your oak selection. I think it's really, really important. And I know that we don't have time to go into oak and have that conversation, but the choices that what coopers and what oak you're putting with your different Pinots. And again, it's not going to be the same one across the board, is really plays a big influence on your grape, your overall quality of the wine, and going back to balance.
Yeah, yeah. So can you give some example? Because you said, there are ones that are a little bit dedicate, the clones are a little bit dedicated in flora. There are ones a little bit bigger. So what are the ones that's a little bit dedicated in flora? What are the ones that's a little bigger? And how do you handle it in winemaking process?
Okay, so I'm gonna just start with the how do I handle it. And I'm a Bordeaux winemaker. This will be my 20th harvest. No, my 30th harvest.
Wow.
Coming up 30 years making wine. And I've been primarily making Bordeaux's for like most of it. So you're coming after, someone coming in to make Pinots, who might be a little heavy-handed, if you will. I try to push the Pinots maybe more than someone who is like, more Burgundian style. However, with that said, our Pomard clone, for example, tends to be just much more elegant, softer tannins, lower phenolic overall. The color is even just lighter in general, and everything's picked, at night. Everything's hand picked. We're sorting through. We have tiny little, tanks that are open tops that we do very gentle punch downs, but we've also done pump overs. And then we have a 667 clone who that is probably, those are my two extremes perhaps in our own vineyard. And a 667, it wants to be big. It's basically looking at its, the wine fermenting next door that's a cab and going like, hey, I want to be something more like that. It has a chance, it has a little bit more tannin structure. It's got more color. But it has all those really beautiful components that you will find in a Pinot Noir. And so I think if like one might be, like depending on the type of Pinot, again, there's not going to be just Napa style. It's going to be, there's just all these different ways we can kind of like coax our wines into different directions. So if you like, a lighter, more elegant style of Pinot, we've got that, right? But if you want it to be something bigger and more robust and have some oomph to it, we also have that. And I would say that is, with whether we're talking about Pinot or other varietals here in the Napa Valley, that's what's so like wonderful about it, is that we have so many different, vineyards and personalities. And I love that Richie said that I was young. Thank you. But we really do have all this whole like range of what we can do in the vineyards and what we can do in the cellars. And I think we're all doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think that's really Yeah, I think it's really wonderful because you're making different styles and you give consumers, a wealth of choices as well. If someone likes a lighter style, they can go for one particular wine. And if they do like a riper style, they can go for something else. And yeah, it's really good. Richie, for instance, you once again, like in your past life, you have experiences of making, in different regions. Napa, of course, being the most known New World wine region. How would you compare like a Napa style to perhaps a Pinot from Australia, Pinot from New Zealand, Hawke's Bay?
Yeah, I mean, like in Australia, there's been a big push with Pinot Noir into like the southeastern corner of Australia, especially Tasmania. And being further south, it's going to be a lot cooler. And they're definitely going for a more Burgundian style. And I would say New Zealand, I mean, obviously it's a much cooler place. And so the wines inherently are going to be, have higher acid, slightly low alcohols, have a little more finesse. And I don't want to say like Napa's low in acid, because it's definitely not. And as Sarah said, it really comes down to clones and winemaking and how far you want to push it. And they have, we have the same clones we have in southeastern Australia and New Zealand. We have them in Napa, but it's very much Napa is definitely going to have a riper expression. And really the best sites, especially down the southern end of the valley around Carneros, some great world-class Pinot Noir growers. I mean, there's a couple of very famous investors from France, from Burgundy, who have bought land in Carneros and have partnerships. And that's definitely a riper style, but it's a world-class style, and it's distinctively Napa, in my opinion. But it's still, what I love about it is it still tastes like Pinot Noir. It's not so ripe that it becomes generic red wine. It still has varietal intensity, it still has acid, it still has balance, but it's unmistakably Napa Valley, and that's what I love about it. When I've done these tastings in other parts of the world where I bring wines from Napa back to New Zealand or back to Australia, they stand out. They stand out because they're very, very high quality and they're rich and they're full, but they still taste like Pinot. And that's really, I think, the best thing about them.
Yeah, definitely. You can't mistake Pinot with other grape varietals. There's just, it's very distinctive. But Matt, I know you focus more on Bordeaux varietals in your past life and at, brand Napa as well. But in your previous life in Argentina and South Africa, do you have experiences with Pinot Noir? And in terms of winemaking, did you observe some differences in terms of what they're doing in the cellar and Napa Valley?
Yeah, so I didn't do any Pinot Noir in Argentina or South Africa. I was able to try some Pinot Noir from the Hermanus Bay area in South
Oh,
Africa, which is a really nice, cool climate. It was well suited to the variety. So they had some interesting, clean, more Burgundian style Pinots there. Going back a little farther, most of my experience with Pinot Noir is in Edna Valley, kind of nearby San Luis Obispo on the central coast of California. So I was there in 2009, doing quite a bit of Pinot Noir from that region. And, like Sarah, I'm kind of a Bordeaux variety guy. And so I actually did my thesis on improving or increasing color in Pinot Noir. And
oh,
so, beyond what we're doing in the winery, there's things like early and more extreme sun exposure in the vineyards to help those grapes load a little bit more color, whether you want that or not, into your fruit. And so, that's kind of an additional tool we have in the vineyard. As far as what we were doing at the winery at that time, and what I see a lot of is open top fermenters. So when you're seeing those cylindrical tanks that have no top to them, basically. And that's really popular with Pinot, I think largely for heat dissipation. Pinot being a fickle grape, you don't want to let those temperatures go out of control, especially if you're trying to make a more reserved style. So those open top tanks allow you to make sure you're not building up a huge heat mass in your tank, and dissipate that heat and alcohol. And then another kind of unique tool to Pinot Noir, at least in my experience, was the inclusion of stems or doing whole cluster fermentations on Pinot Noir. So I don't know, Sarah, if you've played with that at all, but from my understanding, it's largely to help, again, color stability, bringing some tannin in from those stems. Hopefully you're getting more brown stems rather than green stems, so you're not getting the green flavors, but you're helping with the what we call copigmentation, which helps with your color stability on the Pinot, and probably adds some of that kind of fun Pinot funk charm as well.
I see. Yeah, quite interesting to see all those things that you're doing at the different wineries. Yeah, great. That's Pinot. And now let's move to a more controversial, shall I say, red grape varietal, which is Merlot. Merlot got a lot of bad rap from the movie Sideways. But that was how many years ago? More close to 2 decades ago. Do you see a change of consumers' perception in Merlot, or do you still feel the stings of Sideways?
I'll jump in. I would say from an American perspective, there was a steady decline in Merlot, but what I honestly believe there's been a huge positive about that. And really the popularity of Merlot was its greatest downfall. And so Merlot was planted in regions or areas within the Napa Valley which weren't ideally suited. You have to remember that Merlot suffers greatly from hydraulic stress or heat stress. It's not like Cabernet where you can plant almost anything and produce a world-class wine. And it likes clay soils. And if you look at a lot of the soils on the Napa Valley floor, on the hillsides, you have a lot of alluvial soils. If you come to the southern end of the Napa Valley, which is a little bit cooler, there's more clay soils, that's where Merlot thrives. And so there's been taking out Merlot in sites in the Napa Valley which really aren't suited. to really focus in on where Merlot does well. And the benefit of that has been we now have better Merlot than we've ever had before. We understand now that, you know, it suffers greatly if it's overcropped. Like you can Cabernet and maybe crop a little too high and get away with it, but if you overcrop Merlot, it's really not going to do well. And I feel like that false sense of sideways has given us this impetus to make Merlot better than it's ever been before. And so the Merlots that are still produced in Napa, there's only a handful of us still doing it. I know Sarah still makes one, right, Sarah? Please nod.
Yeah.
Better now than they were 2 decades ago, because we've really focused in on now sourcing fruit from the best sites that are suited to Merlot and not planting it alongside Cabernet. It just doesn't grow the same, doesn't like the same soils.
I see. That's really good. I think, you know, it made winemakers, as you said, it made winemakers to be more precise in terms of winemaking, site selection, to make wines that definitely more focused. I think that's really good. And, you know, Sarah, I think you make a Merlot at your winery. So how does it, how can you describe the style of the Merlot that you're making?
I sure can. So I make a Merlot that I sometimes do 100% Merlot. I actually make several different blends with Merlot in them. And I would say, just speaking to the overall popularity of Merlot, people like Merlot. Maybe they've been drinking it as a red blend, but they've been drinking Merlot and people enjoy Merlot. It's fleshy, it's more approachable than sometimes a cab can be, a little bit lower tannins. Our Merlot tends to be big. It's just naturally got some more oomph to it. And I think sometimes that surprises people. And when we're at pouring events and people go, oh, I don't want to try Merlot, I actually really enjoy giving them a splash, because a lot of times people think it's cab. Not that we're trying to make it a Cabernet, but the flavor profile, it's definitely a bigger, it can be a bigger wine than a lot of people, I think, just anticipate. We're like back or gone are the days where Merlot was that soft, fleshy, not very, voluptuous wine, where Merlot can also be big and have a lot of weight to it. And so we do some of our most popular wines at the winery are Merlot based. And so it's very popular, and I'm a pro Merlot consumer.
I see, that's very good. You know, like, if I compare Pinot Noir and Merlot, because you barely see Pinot in a blend, but Merlot, you see more of it, blending with different, Chardonnay, Cabernet, or, Petit Verdot to make a blend, or sometimes people make 100% Merlot wine. So in terms of, diversity of style of Merlot in Napa, what's the trend here? Do you see people using more Merlot in the blend or making 100% single varietal one?
I guess I'll jump in real quick. So that's hard to say like real specific to everyone in Napa, but I would say in general, I think you're going to see more Merlot being blended with something else. Something is either, a portion of the Merlot, whether it's even just a 5% or a 10% added to the Merlot, or Merlot is part of a Cabernet blend. Merlot tends to be less expensive, but it can be, it's just as delicious. And so you're going to see diversity there where people are blending their Merlot. And you can, again, it goes back to, I guess the take home message is going to be that there's so much diversity and there's so many different options here in the Napa Valley that you're going to, if you want 100% Merlot, you're going to be able to find it. If you want to find it and see it in different blends, you're also going to see that there. I mean, it grows well here, as does a lot of varietals. So
that's really good. Okay, now let's jump into the most important grape varietal in Napa, Cabernet Sauvignon. People know Napa because of Cab, and Cab, I think, found really a spiritual home in Napa Valley. So how would you describe Cab, and why is it so successful in Napa Valley? I'll leave that to everyone.
That's a broad question. I would say that honestly, if you look at Napa Valley, it has that perfect balance of soil, well-drained soils that Cabernet likes, and climate. And so it's warm enough to ripen Cabernet to a ripe expression, but there's also enough diversity in the site selection to give you a style or many different styles. And so it has international appeal. And if you looked at I mean, the joke I always have about Cabernet is it's the ultimate traveler. You can plant it almost anywhere in the world and do well. But to really do it at a world-class level where it's better than anything else, there's very few places that you can do it. And Napa Valley, because of the climate, because of those cool nights and warm days, the well-drained soils, the diversity of soils, the diversity of aspects, it really is just a home run no matter how you look at it.
I see. And then in Napa Valley, as Sarah probably said, Cabernet, you can basically plant it anywhere. But so far, the world quality cabs, where are the best sites? Where are they coming from? Your wineries, of course, but
I'll jump in. I think we have a really special site where we're at. I love Cabernet from the entire Napa Valley. But we're in this terrific little bubble in an area called Pritchard's Hill in the Napa Valley, which is kind of just uphill to the east from Oakville. And so we're on these really beautiful volcanic soils primarily. Again, with the diversity, we have 4 different soil series on our about 11.5 acres of vines here. And we're really lucky to be on a site that has those rocky soils that are very well drained. So, as winemakers and growers, we're kind of control freaks. So, we control the water status of our plants, which is a huge benefit. We're also at a higher elevation. We're up at about 1,400 feet. So we're often above the fog line. So we're getting early morning sun exposure. And our specific location gets a really nice breeze that comes up the valley. And so we're typically between the elevation and the breeze, about 5 degrees cooler than valley floor. So, what results for us is small berries with lots of concentration. I think, going back to the bigger picture, Napa wide, I think a key component of Napa Cab is purity of fruit. But I think something that's special about Napa Cab is that you have that purity of fruit with a lot of the nuance that you see in the old world as well. So you find, some minerality, some earthiness, some sage, especially where we're located. And you find all these things without overly green wines. And so it's this beautiful dichotomy of power, tannin, purity of fruit, but also a really amazing amount of nuance in the wines.
I see. I think I have one question for all the panelists, because the Cabernet, is the most widely planted varietal worldwide, and every winemaker is trying their hand, at Cabernet. So in a way, it's very competitive. And if a consumer looking at the wine shelf, you see Cab from Australia, from Argentina, from Chile, even from China. And for consumers, if they are choosing a Cabernet and if they're deciding to choose it from California, Napa Valley, what are the top lines? What are the adjectives you want the consumers to remember about Cab from Napa?
I guess I'll jump in because Sarah doesn't want to jump. I would say, if you looked at Napa Cabernet as a global wine and you compared it to the other great Cabernet regions of the world, anywhere in the world, actually, I would say that the hallmark of Cabernet is concentration, depth of flavor, and its tannin structure. And Napa Valley Cabernet has this wonderful tannin structure where you have an immense amount of tannin, yet they're ripe tannins. And there's very few places in the world that can do that like the Napa Valley. You might get the odd site here and there in other parts of the world, and I mean a single site. But if you look at the Napa Valley as a whole, our ability to make wines with depth, concentration, loads of tannin that's still ripe, so the wine is in balance, it's not hard, there's no rough edges to it, is something that you really can't do anywhere else in the world. And it's really, when you put a Napa Valley Cabernet in a lineup, it stands out for its depth of concentration.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that struck me is the balance as well. Because a lot of times people talk about Cab in Napa, people think, it's too heady. But when I was visiting Napa, the wines that we tasted, you really find they're really balanced and refined. I think it has to do with the evolution of winemaking as well. People understand, which site produces what kind of style of Cabernet, very precise in terms of winemaking selection as well. I think that's really important.
Last few decades as well, I think there's been a huge strive in the Napa Valley to balance, and gone are the days of the super high octane, high alcohol wines, and it's all about balancing fruit and alcohol. And there's one thing we could do in Napa, which a lot of other places can't do in the world, is because of that sheer depth of concentration, we can carry a bit higher alcohol, but the wine's still in balance. Whereas if you did a cooler region and you let the fruit get that ripe, the alcohol is going to overpower the wine. It's going to thin the wine out and make it seem hot and hollow. But because of that sheer depth of fruit concentration we carry in Napa, we can make wines that have depth, weight, concentration, yet remain balanced. And that's what's really key to Napa Valley on a global scale compared to other wine regions in the world, is that depth of flavor, yet balanced. And there's very few places that I've worked anywhere or traveled in the world that can do that.
I see. Yeah, that's really precious. But what about Sarah? You make Cabernet from different parts, and you make Cabernet from sort of like the crown jewel as well from Rutherford. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the style of cab that you're working with at the winery.
Sure. So we have 6 different vineyard properties in Napa, and we have Cabernet Sauvignon planted in 5. And in those 5 different vineyards, I have 11 different clones of Cabernet. So we have, cab planted in various locations. And I think it's been really interesting over the course of, since I've been in the wine industry, how much we've learned as an industry in Napa. And I'm going to do a quick little shout out for the NVV, for the Napa Valley Vintners, for doing a lot of education, for getting winemakers together to talk. One of the really wonderful things about being in Napa is that we communicate and we get together with our winemaking, colleagues, and we share information. And instead of going, thinking that we're like their little private things and to keep them by ourselves, we're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what oak's working for you? The one thing is that it's all going to be a little bit different simply because we have our different winemaking styles. If we were to give chefs all chicken and the same ingredients, they're likely going to come up with something very different, right? So we still have that ability, our unique terroir, I can, even in our vineyard, I'm sitting in Rutherford right now, and the cab tastes different on on the more either the northern part or over on the west side versus the eastern side. Even in our own vineyards, you're going to have different flavor profiles and different soil types. And then you throw the clones on there and then add oak on top of that, and how that all plays in. I'm speaking more than to the bigger. I guess I make a lot of cabs, and they're all, I kind of like, but they all have to be unique. So I will do either site-specific, vineyard designated, or combinations of all. And like I do have, I make fruit from Rutherford, and Rutherford, just specifically, just to do a shout out. I mean, it's this great. There's really unique flavor profiles for just this appellation specifically. But that's what we can say, that is because we're talking Napa. Pritchard Hill has their own uniqueness. Every different parts of the valley really do have kind of like these really special characteristics that actually cannot be duplicated, or rarely can be duplicated. So if you want, a lighter style of cab, or you like something that has more herbaceousness, maybe it's more savory herbs, or right, you can find that as well. If you want something that is, maybe a little over concentrated in balance. But I would say most people, I believe, at least today, are really truly making balanced wines that really fit their specific style. We're not trying to like make what the neighbor's making or what someone in another region is making. We're just really trying to do the very best we can with the fruit that we have. And we've learned an awful lot, and we're continuing to learn, and which is why everyone's on here, and we're talking about it. If we can educate and get people to understand our region and what we have to offer, I think people are going to be very happy. And if that style and that flavor profile that you like, it's likely that you're going to find it here. Albeit we, probably do have riper flavors than other parts, just simply because we can. And instead of fighting it, we just embrace it. And we're, and I would say the take home would be balanced wines across the board.
Yeah, definitely. The evolution of cab style in Napa is quite prominent. I hope more people recognize that change as well. And another thing I think you mentioned, it's the community spirit. That's something that I take away from my visit in Napa as well. When you're at different wineries, you're breaking bread with different winemakers. What do you do with a cab? I'm having issue with the early ripeness of cab, and people are very eager and generous with their suggestions, advice, and expertise. I think that's something a lot of the different wine regions should learn from Napa as well. Quite precious. Yeah, and then what about Matt? Because you're making wine from one of the most sought after, maybe expensive real estate in Napa as well, in Pritchard Hill, and your previous life is with Donna Estate as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the area that you're making wines and the style of wines you're making with Cab.
Yeah, so like Sarah, really trying to express the site here. Being an estate winery, I'm extremely fortunate to be able to arrive at any one of our vines on the property in, about 45 seconds on my ATV. And so, our approach here is kind of to obsess about everything, and that obviously starts in the vineyard, and quite honestly so much of the work happens in the vineyard, and so every step in the process, we're obsessing about every detail. That doesn't always mean we're doing something. Sometimes hands off is the best way to go, whether that's using the ambient or native yeasts that are on the grapes and in our environment, whether it's deciding not to pick. It's making sure that you're never becoming complacent, I think, and kind of giving the specialness of the site the respect it deserves. So again, obsessive farming, I mentioned earlier, we're kind of control freaks, but at the same time, as winemakers, we build layers and layers and layers of complexity on everything we do. On our little site here, we have 16 different blocks and 13 different unique combinations of clone and variety. So that makes for so much complexity. It makes us pull our hairs out. As you can see, Richie and I are struggling there a little bit. But it creates just layers and layers and layers for us to work with. We might have a 1 acre block here that I pick 3 different times. And that might be based on the aspect of the block, how it rolls over the hill. Maybe one of the different soil series I was mentioning creeps into a part of the block. And so, here at Brand, it's a focus on quality. And I would say the same thing with Napa Valley. I mean, you can make all sorts of comparisons to other regions, but I think what's special about Napa Valley is if that's on the label, that somebody obsessed about what went into that bottle.
I see. That's very good. I think we have some questions from the audience. One of the questions they asked is, how would you distinguish a Rutherford from Oakville cabs? Yeah, and then also you mentioned Napa, because it's so wide and so diverse. How would you distinguish one cab from, for instance, Stag's Leap from Howell Mountain, and Rutherford and Oakville?
That's a very challenging question, but I mean, each AVA has a typicity to it, or a characteristic to it as a whole. But even within that region or that AVA, Rutherford's famous for the Rutherford dust and its dusty tannins, and Oakville to me is always pure cassis with a firm tannin structure. But even within that region, you can find wines that don't fit that meld. But if you were to look at where Matt is on Pritchard Hill, it's volcanic soils. It's quite you have an ambient or an abundance of tannin and more of a red fruit profile up on Pritchard Hill. Calistoga, have ripe tannin, but it can be a little bit hard sometimes. Over on the other side, you have sedimentary soils up on Mount Vita and Spring Mountain. They tend to be cooler, get more black fruits, more cassis, sometimes a little bit leafy. I mean, each region has its typicity, but they definitely can change due to site, clone, farming practice. I mean, Matt spoke about the change within his small vineyard with their 13, and each block, I'm guessing, has a very distinct character, which is very distinct. But if you put them all together, they're going to taste like a Pritchard Hill Cabernet, and Brand makes an amazing Cabernet. And I know Sarah makes multiple Cabernets throughout the Napa Valley, and I'm sure they all have their unique flavors based on region. But I mean, there's definitely ones out there that are very specific to that AVA, but there's also ones that will stand out because they're a little bit different within the AVA, which is the beauty of Napa with its many, what do we have, 100 and Connor can probably jump in 100 and something different soil types. So it's pretty diverse.
I see. Okay. Anyone else want to add on this? Miss Sarah or Matt?
I think Richie did a really great job. I mean, truly, wrapped it up, did a nice job.
Great. I think there's another question about organic, winemaking and farming in Napa Valley. So what is the status? What's people's attitude with the organic wine, and what is the trend? Do you see winemakers heading towards that direction?
I guess I'll jump in quickly. There's a big push towards sustainability in Napa. Most wineries I know, most of my friends are certified Napa Valley Green, so they have a sustainable certification. And beyond that, you have the next step of organic, and there's a lot of organic producers. And really at the top end, you have the biodynamic and regenerative farming, which is sort of the further extreme. I would say that if you look at any winery in the Napa Valley, the goal is to preserve what they have and make it better. So we don't want to continually take from the land, we want to put back. So there's definitely a trend towards organic principles, biodynamic principles. Maybe not everyone is certified, but we all want to preserve that land that we have and make sure it's there for the future. So it's something that I would say is gaining ground. It's gaining ground very quickly, even if people are not certified. I know we use a number of different biodynamic and organic principles in our vineyards. It's really, it's the future. I mean, let's face it, we have to look after the land that we have and make sure that it's there for future generations. And I've never seen any winemaker who cares about his vineyard who's not going to farm it in a sustainable way to make sure it's there for the future.
Yeah, indeed.
I would just jump in really quickly to say, just for clarity, we're talking about more sustainability and organic farming in the vineyard rather than making organic wines in the cellar. And for someone like we're certified organic here in Rutherford, we're sustainable. I think it is the trend in the Napa Valley, and I think it's because we really do care about the land that people are across the board, whether it's in the vineyard or the wineries themselves becoming green, becoming sustainable across the board. It's just kind of one of the things that we just do here, and people are doing it, really, really well. But I just wanted to make sure that we're clarifying that, it's more vineyard practices as opposed to the cellar, at least here in Napa.
I see. Oh, that's very good. I think we had a wonderful discussion today about the 6 main varietals in Napa. And I hope all the audience who tuned in to watch our talk would walk away with their impressions of the different varietals, and they're armed with a wealth of knowledge to help sell Napa wines to their customers from different countries and different parts of the world. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. They have another discussion coming up tomorrow and Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So definitely tune in as well. And thank you for all the panelists for your time and expertise. And have a lovely day, everyone.